April 2022, Use Fusion launched a new podcast series, Nuclear Collateral Damage, Conversations with Survivors and Experts. In this podcast, we aim to raise awareness about the consequences of nuclear weapons testing or use by uplifting voices of previous and current generations who have been negatively impacted up until this day. In addition to that, we also draw attention to a kinship of nuclear weapons testing or use with colonial histories in different parts of the world. By addressing individual and collective traumas, we pursue to revive, restore, and reclaim human dignity. My name is Agira Msietenova, and I'm a host of this podcast and a program assistant at Use Fusion. Throughout 2 months, Use Fusion spoke to 8 activists, advocates, experts, and survivors from those countries and communities which were affected by nuclear weapons testing programs in different parts of the world. There are 5 episodes of this podcast that are available on Spotify and other platforms. If you want to listen to these episodes and read an article format of each conversation, visit our website, usefusion.org. In this video, I would like to share some highlights of conversation that we had in the podcast episodes. Our first episode starts with the background history of the first nuclear weapons testing, which took place at the Trinity test site in New Mexico in July 1945. We invited 2 guests, Tina Cordova and Livia Cordova from New Mexico, United States, who are activists and advocates and representatives of Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium. These are some highlights from our conversations with Tina Cordova and Livia Cordova.
I always say that what started at Trinity changed our lives forever. We have never lived another day after Trinity without this constant threat of this horrendous use of nuclear force. And so all I can say is that you can sit back and watch things happen, or you can get involved and make sure that you contribute all that you can towards the disarmament movement for your future and the future of the generation after you. I always say I do this work because I have a son and I have 2 grandsons, and I do it for them and for all the other, young people and people around me and for their futures. And so we all have to think in those terms. But, when there's that saying that John Lewis, one of our great congressmen, used to say, and I won't get it exactly the way he said it, but he would say, when you see something that's wrong and you know that it's wrong, you have to do something about it. You can't just sit back and watch. You have to be an active participant in challenging.
Our generation has, just in general, has witnessed traumas that are a result of the generations before us, just with different things. Nuclear related, climate related, safety related in general. And that different perspective will hopefully allow for us to do away with things that are not in the best interest of humankind, because it's not. It may take some time, but this new generation of activists, of leaders, natural leaders, people who have had to become leaders as a result of the unfortunate situation they're in. These young people are very promising and energetic and motivated, and can hopefully enforce change. But it unfortunately looks like, as of now, like an uphill battle, and one that cannot be given up on.
Our second episode follows the history of the World War II and highlights the only time when nuclear weapons were used by the United States, which dropped 2 bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. In this episode, we spoke with Miho Tanaka and Iko Nakamura, youth activists from Japan. They are both not from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but they have been actively involved in raising awareness about the need for nuclear disarmament among younger generation, engaging Japanese parliamentarians. These are the highlights of the conversations we had with Iko Nakamura from No Nukes Tokyo and Miho Tanaka from Kakuwaka, Hiroshima.
Since I started Kakuwaka, I have experienced both happy and bad moments. Sometimes I am exposed to criticism. For example, nuclear abolition is too idealistic or something like that. But for me, as someone who has been taking actions for only a few years, such criticism is nothing. Hibakusha have been working for decades. One of our major achievements is the TPNW. The civil society has created a new normal. So I think there were probably many people who opposed slavery and women's suffrage at the time, but through the power of those who have gone before us, a story has pulled us to the right side. So I can find no reason to be pessimistic. What we can do is not only pray, but also take concrete actions. And as you said, there are many problems in the world. They are all connected when you get down to it. And I believe we can work in solidarity to solve them. The issue of nuclear weapons is connected to the climate crisis, gender inequality, and many other issues that humanity faces. I believe that we need to work together to create a society that preserves the dignity of each individual rather than separating those issues. And in doing so, we can create a great deal of influence that those in power cannot ignore.
First of all, as one of the organization of the only country of one of the countries which experienced the atomic bombing war, we are aiming to spread and emphasize the inhumanity of nuclear weapons by delivering the message from Hibakusha. So within many realities of international securities, decision makers tend to merely regard nuclear weapons as one of the methods to protect their nations. However, before recognition as a nuclear deterrence method, we want to encourage them to realize and be aware that nuclear weapons are a destructive weapon, which destroys people immediately, and even survival suffers psychologically and physically forever. We aim to make this paradigm shift of perspective towards nuclear weapons by spreading the idea of inhumanity of nuclear weapons. And what is more, as another message we want to deliver, especially to young people in different countries, we want to emphasize that we young people have to confront with this issue of the nuclear weapon the most. We have to be aware that we are going to live in the world we are making right now. Through election, activism, or anything, we have to make our voice heard by the decision makers.
Our third episode follows the history after the Second World War, and it explores the Soviet nuclear weapons testing program at the Semipalatinsk nuclear testing site. We had conversations with Dr. Torzhan Kasenova, an expert in nuclear politics, and Yerdaulet Rahmatullah, a youth activist from Kazakhstan. The impacts of nuclear legacy on the national identity of people from Kazakhstan and the role of activists from previous and current generations were also discussed in this episode. This is what Dr. Kasenova and Yerdaulet Rahmatullah shared with audience about the involvement of young generations on the issues of nuclear disarmament.
My number one advice would be not to lose optimism. I think it's very difficult to work in this field if you allow yourself to succumb to cynicism. I think it's important to remember that even small drops make an ocean, and especially if you look at the trends in the nuclear field right now with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the rights, the reclaiming of agency by countries that historically were not part of the conversation. And so I think the field as a whole is moving in the right direction, although I would admit sometimes it's difficult because disarmament is not imminent, and maybe sometimes young people might think, what's the point of all this? And yes, I would say not to get discouraged, and just recognizing that each person in their own personal and professional capacity has agency. If you are an activist, you have agency in advocacy work. If you are a journalist, you have a platform to inform people. If you're a scholar like myself, you can put your effort into narrating the history with detail and nuance so that others can draw lessons. And my other advice, especially for young people from Kazakhstan or other countries that are not considered to be, nuclear powers or big guys or whatever, really remember about the fact that your voice matters as much as anybody else's, that we all have stakes in the nuclear future. If there is a nuclear war, everybody will become a victim. So it's really not a prerogative of only nuclear powers to participate in this course, and keep up good work and move in the right direction.
Now all of us living in the politically unstable moments, and there is a risk of massive use of chemical or nuclear weapons, right? All of us on the natural level understand the threats, consequences, and irrationality of such occurrence. For that reason, young people have to educate themselves and others on the importance of nuclear security, education, and of course advocate on the domestic, national, and international level for the peace building and nuclear disarmament.
In the fourth episode, Youth Fusion spoke with Ariana Tipan, a nuclear justice advocate from the Marshall Islands. We get to learn about the historical background of the United States nuclear testing program in the Marshall Islands, connecting it with nuclear and colonial legacies, forced displacements, and how to utilize education to pursue nuclear justice. Ariana Tiban shared her thoughts on the significance of nuclear legacy in shaping the development of her country and community.
The nuclear legacy has since shaped our values and character today as Marshallese. The overall health of the people has been drastically altered as a result of the nuclear weapons testing program, and this has left us with no choice but to be survivors and to be advocates for each other. I'd also like to point out that the trauma that's associated with this legacy plays a role as we're now trying to educate each other. Marshallese people are naturally kind-hearted and very, very humble people. This history that has scarred many families, naturally they've withdrawn from speaking up about these issues. However, there are a certain few who have weathered the storms and have been vocal since the very beginning and continue to be advocates for the voiceless. With the nuclear legacy being integrated into school curriculums just recently, it will now be up to our youth and the younger generations to educate the older generations, such as mine, who missed out on this important piece of history and where we had to learn it ourselves.
In the last 5th episode, Use Fusion spoke with Mere Tuilau, a youth activist from Fiji. Together with Mere Tuilau, we explored the destinies of Fijian veterans who were sent to Kiribati Island, which at the time was a colony of the British Empire and a nuclear test site. Mere Tuilau spoke how Fijian soldiers were treated unequally in comparison with other soldiers and military servicemen from other countries. As veterans, they haven't received adequate compensation after their service was finished at the nuclear test site. Mere Tuilau shared the story of her activism as a part of Young Solwara Pacific in preserving the ocean and land of the Pacific as sacred symbols of their community and culture. This is a message of Mere Tuilau to our listeners.
The issues on nuclear justice throughout the world is something that we, if not directly, indirectly, know the harm it brings to us. If there's anything I want to continue to encourage the youth is that someone once believed that the prohibition of nuclear weapon was impossible to achieve. But through decades of activism and the sweats of our matures, we are here. Sadly, many of our victims of nuclear testing are not here to witness or even receive an apology, compensation, or proper medical care. But then time and time have proven through our work, through those activists and victims who live with us in spirit, prove that it is possible to bring about a world and own the future that we dream of.
Again, my name is Aygeram Sityanova, and I'm a host of podcast series Nuclear Collateral Damage, Conversations with Survivors and Experts. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I really hope that you listen to our podcast episodes. And if you still haven't, check out Spotify and other platforms. Also, visit our website usefusion.org to learn more about us, our projects, and activities. Thank you, take care, and goodbye.